I thought I knew what orphan meant. It isn't just losing a father. It's living in a family that breathes and laughs while pretending you don't exist. When my grandfather died, I thought I had one thing left: the will he promised would protect me. Instead, my stepsister stood up, smiled, and took everything as the sole heir. I thought it was over, until a late-night call from his lawyer. His voice trembled. "We need to meet. About the will." "There is something serious you do not know. My name is Paisley Hernandez. I am 33 years old. My office is on the 42nd floor of the Lumina Vector Tower, a blade of glass and steel that punctures the Denver skyline. From here, I can watch thunderstorms roll off the Rocky Mountains, a silent, violent ballet of nature that makes the city grid look fragile. I am the Vice President of Product and Data. It's a title that sounds solid, concrete. It means I am in charge of the company's brain. I just finished a 90-minute presentation in the Summit Room. It's our flagship conference room. Designed to intimidate, 3 walls are floor-to-ceiling glass, giving you the feeling of floating or falling. The air is recycled, filtered, and kept at a precise 68 degrees. I was presenting the expansion strategy for the Helix Pulse engine. Helix Pulse is mine. It wasn't born in a sterile lab or funded by a venture capital round. It was born in a college dorm room at 2 a.m, fueled by instant noodles and a desperate need to prove I existed. It's a predictive analytics engine, but that's too simple. It doesn't just analyze data. It anticipates human behavior. It watches the digital flow of money, billions of transactions a second, and finds the ghost in the machine. The pattern that predicts whether a market will panic or rally. Last year, the banks and hedge funds that use Helix Pulse paid Lumina Vector Analytics just over $400 million for the privilege. The board members watched me. They are, almost exclusively, men who wear their wealth like armor. Their shirts cost more than my first car. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes were sharp. They don't care about the elegance of the code. They care about the numbers, and the numbers I gave them were immaculate. "As you can see from the Q3 stress test," I said, my voice calm and even, projected perfectly by the room's hidden microphones. "By integrating the new sentiment analysis module, we're projecting an accuracy increase of 4.5%. That translates to an estimated $80 million in new contracts by fiscal end." Silence. Then, Marian Torres, our CEO, gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was the only validation I needed. Marian is a shark who respects other sharks. The tension in the room broke. Shoulders relaxed. One of the older VPs, a man named Harris, actually chuckled. "Well, Paisley, you've done it again. I am, by every conceivable metric, a success. The Denver Business Post called me the data whisperer. I am competent. I am in control. I am wealthy." I closed my laptop, the heavy glass door hissing shut behind me. The hallway back to my office is carpeted in a dense, sound-dampening gray. The quiet after a performance like that is deafening. It's the sudden stop after a full sprint. My corner office is my fortress. It's not cozy. It's an extension of my mind, organized, minimalist, and defended. Polished concrete floors, a wall of smoked glass, a massive desk of reclaimed teak that weighs more than a smart car. The air smells faintly of ozone from the high-end air purifier. There is almost nothing personal in it. No diplomas on the wall, no trinkets, just 2 photographs, set in simple, brushed steel frames. The first photo is from another life. It's me, maybe 6 or 7, gap-toothed and grinning. I'm standing on the old wooden dock at my grandfather's lake house. My grandfather, Thomas Collins, has his big, rough hand on my shoulder. He was a man built of granite and quiet observation, wearing his favorite red flannel shirt, the one that smelled like sawdust and the cherry tobacco from his pipe. He isn't smiling, not really, but his eyes are. My grandmother, Evelyn, is on my other side, hugging me so hard I'm almost lifted off the dock. She's beaming, her warmth a physical presence. That dock, that lake, that small moment of safety that was my world. The second photo is from this life. It was taken at 3 in the morning, almost 10 years ago, in the server room of Lumina Vector's first office, which was really just a glorified garage. It's me and my original Team 4 engineers who believed in my idea when it was just equations on a whiteboard. We are pale, sleep-deprived, and look half mad. I'm holding up the external hard drive, the first stable prototype of the Helix Pulse engine. We were victorious. My entire identity is captured in those two frames. The family that was supposed to be my anchor, and the work that became my lifeboat. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, the one that cost $3,000 and supposedly molds to my spine. I let out a breath I felt I'd been holding since 8 a.m. The adrenaline drained away, leaving the familiar hollow ache that lives just beneath my ribs. My phone vibrated on the desk, a sharp, angry buzz. It wasn't a Slack notification from my team or an email from Marion. It was a text message from a number I barely recognized. A distant cousin, Martha, someone from my grandmother's side of the family. We exchanged Christmas cards. That was it. The text contained no words, just an image, a screenshot of an Instagram story. It was my stepsister, Jenna Miller. She was standing on the wraparound porch of my grandfather's house, his house, the one he built with his own hands. She was wearing a white, bohemian-style dress that probably cost a fortune. Her blonde hair perfectly styled in beachy waves. She held a flute of champagne, angled toward the sunset over the lake. It was a performance of effortless wealth. The geotag, in an elegant script, read "The Collins Estate by the Lake," her estate. She had renamed it. The caption, typed below her smiling face, was a masterpiece of narcissistic gratitude. Just another quiet evening inheriting my destiny. So blessed Grandpa Tom knew who truly loved him and deserved his legacy. Heiress life. Lake, life blessed family first. A cold, sharp sickness rose in my throat. Family first. It has been 8 months since my grandfather's funeral. 8 months since we sat on uncomfortable wooden chairs in the office of Arthur Blake, the family lawyer. It was a dusty office, smelling of old paper and stale coffee, a place where family histories were codified and ended. I remember staring at a crack in the plaster wall, tracing its path like a map, while Mr. Blake read the last will and testament, revised. The word revised had hung in the air, a warning I didn't understand at the time. The document was precise, clinical. The lake house, the one Jenna was currently using as a backdrop for her influencer career, along with its 120 acres of surrounding timberland, the main residence in Maple Ridge, the entire stock portfolio, the one Grandpa Tom had built from nothing, the one he used to teach me about dividends and market patience, the savings accounts, the bonds, the antique collection, everything. 100% of the Thomas Collins estate was bequeathed to his beloved granddaughter, Jenna Miller. My grandmother, Evelyn, his wife of 55 years, was granted a modest monthly stipend from a pre-established annuity, enough to rent a small apartment, enough to be quiet. My name, Paisley Hernandez, was never spoken. I was not in the document, not a single dollar, not a photograph, not even a mention. In the final, legal accounting of his life, I did not exist. I need you to understand. This is not about the money. The bitterest irony of my life is that my bonus check from last quarter alone could buy that lake house twice over. I don't need his portfolio. I built my own. This was about erasure. This was a statement. This was the man who taught me how to play chess, letting me win the first few times before ruthlessly checkmating me, saying, "Never underestimate your opponent, Paisley." The man who drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to fix my broken-down college car. The man who, after my father died, was the only solid ground I had left. This was him, at the very end of his life, taking a pen and striking my name from his history. It was the final validation of a lifetime of messaging from my mother and stepfather. I was the outsider, the temporary obligation. Jenna was the daughter. Jenna was the one who mattered. My family tree is rotten. My father, Daniel Hernandez, died when I was 7. A sudden, shocking silence. My mother, Linda, did not grieve long. Within a year, She married Brad Miller. Brad was a real estate broker with teeth too white and a handshake that lasted too long. He brought with him his own daughter, Jenna, a girl with blonde curls and a practiced smile. From that day, the house dynamics shifted. Brad and Linda became a united front, their primary mission the care and feeding of Jenna's ego. I became the ghost in the hallway, the leftover from a life Linda was eager to forget. My grandparents, Thomas and Evelyn, my mother's parents, were my only sanctuary. They were the ones who drove out to get me for weekends, who kept a room for me in their house that was mine, who told me I was smart, who told me I was worthy. They were my protectors, until that will. My work phone buzzed, a separate device, all business. It was an email from Forbes. They were confirming my photo shoot for the 40 Under 40 issue. My assistant had scheduled an invitation to keynote a global fintech summit in London. My professional life is a tower of achievements. I am the woman who built the Helix Pulse engine. I am the VP. I am respected. I am invited. I am seen. I looked back at the screenshot on my personal phone. Jenna, toasting her destiny. They can put my face on the cover of a magazine. They can fly me across the world to talk about the future of data. But in my grandfather's will, in the only history I ever truly cared about, I was a zero. I didn't go to the celebratory drinks with my team at the new rooftop bar. I couldn't stomach the congratulations, the small talk, the noise. I drove home. Home is a penthouse apartment in the Lodu district. It's all glass and exposed brick, a place I bought with my first major bonus. It's sterile and beautiful, and tonight, it felt like a cage. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the lights of Denver, thousands of people, thousands of lives, all moving. I had accepted it. I really had. In the long, quiet months after the reading, I processed the grief, the betrayal, and the cold, hard reality. My grandfather had made his choice. My mother and stepfather had won. My job was to build a life so high and so strong that their gravity could never pull me down again. I accepted that the story was over. I had accepted that the will was a fact, as solid and unchangeable as the mountains outside my window. I had accepted it all until that one Tuesday night, nearly a year after the funeral, when a phone call from that same lawyer, Arthur Blake, made everything explode. But before I tell you about that call, I have to go back. I have to start at the building, to understand why that one phone call changed my entire world. You need to know just how twisted, just how broken my family was from the very start. My father, Daniel Hernandez, died when I was 7. It wasn't a slow fade or a long, prepared for illness. It was a rupture. One moment, he was in the kitchen arguing with my mother about the utility bill, his voice a familiar, warm bass. The next, there was the sound of a heavy thump, like a sack of flour dropping, and then a terrible, gaping silence. I remember the hospital in flashes of sterile, cold light, the smell of bleach and something sickly sweet, like dying flowers. I remember the rhythmic, metronomic beep of the heart monitor next to his bed. My mother, Linda, stood near the window, her back rigid, looking out at the parking lot. I held my father's hand. It was large, calloused from his work, and still warm. I sat there for hours, tracing the lines on his palm, waiting for him to wake up. Then, later it could have been hours or days, a doctor came in and spoke in a low voice. The beep, beep, beep stumbled, caught, and then resolved into a single, piercing, continuous tone. I didn't know what the sound meant, but I knew, with the absolute certainty of a child, that it was the sound of the world ending. His hand was no longer warm. The funeral was a blur of black dresses, whispered apologies, and people patting my head. People brought casseroles in disposable aluminum pans. Then the casseroles stopped coming. The sympathy cards stopped arriving. My mother did not wear black for long. Less than a year after my father was buried, Brad Miller walked into our lives. He was a real estate broker, slick and polished, with teeth that were too white and a laugh that was too loud. He smelled perpetually of sharp cologne and hair gel. He spoke in a smooth, sweet syrup, calling my mother Linda Love and charming every adult he met. He brought his daughter with him, Jenna Miller. She was 5 years old, a dollop of sunshine with bright blonde curls and wide blue eyes. She was, by all accounts, adorable. She never cried. She smiled on command. Everyone, from my mother's friends to the neighbors, immediately called her the little princess. Our house, which had been heavy with silence and grief, was suddenly filled with her laughter, her toys, her presence. The change was immediate and absolute. The living room, which had held the only framed photographs of my father, was redecorated. Brad's aesthetic was modern, cold. The photo of my father holding me on his shoulders at a county fair, his face split in a wide grin, was the first to go. It was replaced by a large, professionally shot portrait of Brad, my mother, and Jenna, all smiling on a beach in clothes that matched. My father's photo migrated to the hallway closet. Then, a few weeks later, I found it in a cardboard box in the garage, stacked under old tax returns and a broken vacuum cleaner. I tried to take it out. I just wanted to keep it in my room. My mother caught me, her hand stopping mine. Her voice was gentle, but her grip was firm. "Paisley, don't dwell on this," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We have a new family now. It's time to look forward." Brad Miller never laid a hand on me. He wasn't the kind of stepfather you read about in horror stories, the kind that leaves bruises. His cruelty was more refined. It was the cruelty of total indifference. He simply looked through me. He didn't ask about my grades, even when I brought home a perfect report card. He never remembered my birthday, though Jenna's half-birthdays were celebrated with catered parties and mountains of gifts. His entire capacity for fatherhood was a laser beam focused solely on Jenna. He took her shopping at the mall. He coached her pee-wee soccer team. He financed her summer trips to ballet camp. I was the ghost in the hallway, the leftover from a previous marriage, the furniture that came with the house. The slow, systematic erasure of my existence culminated in the year I turned 14. I had the larger bedroom, the one at the end of the hall that overlooked the backyard garden. It had been my room my entire life. It still had the glow-in-the-dark stars my father and I had stuck to the ceiling. Jenna's room was smaller, facing the street. One Tuesday afternoon, my mother came in while I was doing homework. She didn't knock. She sat on the edge of my bed, smoothing the comforter with her hand, a bright, artificial smile on her face. "Honey," she began, her voice light, "Jenna is getting older. You know, she's a teenager now. She needs a little more space, for her things, and for when her friends sleep over." I looked up from my algebra textbook, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew exactly where this was going. "What do you mean?" "We're going to move you downstairs," she said, still smiling, as if she were offering me a wonderful surprise. "To the guest room." The guest room was not a guest room. It was a small, damp box near the garage, barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser. It shared a wall with the laundry, and the smell of detergent and mildew was permanent. "But this is my room," I whispered. Her smile tightened at the edges. The false brightness faded, replaced by a weary impatience. "Don't be dramatic. Paisley, it's just a room. Jenna needs this one. We're a family, and we have to make accommodations." The fight was over before it began. That weekend, I packed. I sat on the floor, my father's old college textbooks in my lap. He was an engineer, and I loved the smell of the old paper and the cryptic diagrams. I packed my life into 2 cardboard boxes. The model airplane he and I had built, its balsa wood wing now cracked, the few clothes I owned that Jenna hadn't already borrowed and ruined, and last, the single photo from my desk drawer. It was the last one, taken a few months before he died. Me, my dad, my mom, and my grandparents, Thomas and Evelyn, at a summer barbecue. We were all smiling. My mother looked genuinely happy. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me. "Don't drag this out. Paisley," she said. "Dinner's at 6. Brad's ordering pizza for Jenna's study group." I moved downstairs. The washing machine thumped against the wall, a constant, dull rhythm while I tried to sleep. Upstairs, I could hear Jenna and her friends laughing. They painted my old room a bright, obnoxious pink. My only escape was my grandparents. Every other Friday, at 5 p.m. sharp, my grandfather Thomas's old Ford truck would rumble up the driveway. It was a faded, dented blue, the cab smelling of sawdust, old tools, and the faint, sweet tang of the cherry tobacco he kept in his pipe. I would have my backpack waiting by the door. I'd run out and climb onto the high bench seat. The vinyl cracked and cool. He'd just nod, a small, kind smile touching his lips. Paisley girl. And I could breathe. The drive to their small, sturdy house in Maple Ridge, 45 minutes away, was my decompression. We'd listen to the AM radio, the static-filled news, or sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. When we walked into their house, the air was different. It smelled of my grandmother Evelyn's baking cinnamon, apples, and yeast, and the lemon oil she used on the antique furniture, and on their walls, on the mantel. In the hallway, my father's photos were everywhere. His high school graduation portrait, his college diploma from the state university, the photo of him holding me as a baby. In my grandparents' house, Daniel Hernandez was not a ghost in a garage box. He was a memory, loved and respected. My grandmother Evelyn was the heart. She saw the invisibility I felt at home. In her kitchen, I had my own drawer, stocked with the peanut butter crackers and root beer she knew I liked. She set up a small, sturdy desk in the guest room, their real guest room, and called it Paisley's office. On that desk, in a heavy silver frame, was a picture of just me and my dad at the lake. She would put her warm, slightly shaky hand on my head. "You are not invisible, sweetheart," she'd murmur. "Not here. We see you." My grandfather Thomas was the anchor. He was a man of quiet, powerful routines. He taught me to play chess on an old, hand-carved wooden board. He never let me win, not after the first game. "You're smart," he'd say, moving his rook. "So use it. Don't let anyone make you play their game." We'd go to his workshop, a shed that smelled of oil and metal, and he'd show me the guts of old tube radios, how to solder a connection, how to find the break in the wiring. "Everything can be fixed, Paisley," he'd say, "if you're willing to look close enough." He told me stories about his life, how he'd started a small trucking company with 2 old rigs and built it into a regional business before selling it at just the right time, how he'd taken that money and, as he put it, bet on America. He invested in stocks, blue-chip companies, utilities, things that built the country. He wasn't a gambler. He was a planter. He was the stock market old guy of the family, and he was quietly, comfortably wealthy from it. The difference between my 2 worlds was never clearer than Christmas. When I was 16, the last Christmas I spent under my mother's roof, the contrast was a physical slap. Jenna, then 14, was the star. She received a brand new mountain bike, a laptop, and an all-expenses-paid trip to Florida for spring break with her friends. I received a $50 gift card to a department store. I smiled. I said thank you. I watched Jenna squeal and hug Brad. I watched my mother watch Jenna, her face illuminated by her daughter's joy. And in that moment, she didn't see me at all. Later that day, my grandparents stopped by for their obligatory, tense visit. They hugged me tightly. After they left, I found an envelope tucked deep into my coat pocket. Inside was a small, folded note, wrapped around a bank passbook. The note was in my grandfather's strong, blocky handwriting. "This is the savings account we opened for you the year you turned 3. We've put a little in, here and there. Use it to go somewhere further than this place. Someday." I opened the passbook. The balance was not small. It was thousands of dollars. It was a foundation. It was an escape route. I sat there on my small bed in the laundry room, holding that passbook, and the cold, hard realizations settled into my bones. I was 16. I was not invisible to my grandparents, but in my own home, I was an afterthought, a transaction. If I wanted a future, I couldn't wait for permission. I couldn't hope to be seen. I would have to build my own life, brick by brick. Just as my grandfather had built his company, I had to get out, and I would have to do it myself. During my senior year of high school, I applied to exactly one university that was not a state school or a local college. I applied to the Midwest Institute of Data Systems in Chicago. It was a private, terrifyingly expensive, top-tier school known for spitting out some of the best data scientists in the country. I applied as a secret, a fantasy. I used a fee waiver I got from my guidance counselor, who saw my SAT scores and pulled me aside. "You belong at a place like this, Paisley," she'd said. I didn't believe her. The acceptance letter arrived on a gray March afternoon. It wasn't a thin envelope. It was a thick, glossy packet, heavy with potential. I stood at the mailbox for a full minute before I could get my fingers to tear it open. "Congratulations, Program in Data Science Distinction. Welcome to MIDS." I ran inside. The packet clutched in my hand. I hadn't felt that light, that genuinely happy, since before my father died. I burst into the kitchen, where my mother was reading a magazine at the table. "I got in," I yelled, breathless. "I got into the Midwest Institute. I got in." Her face, which had been relaxed, tightened. She put down the magazine. "Oh, Paisley. That's nice. Where is that?" Again. "Chicago," I said, the joy starting to dim, like a light bulb flickering. "It's one of the best programs in the country." "Chicago," she repeated, as if I'd said, "Mars." "Well, we'll have to see. Brad's not home." I didn't get to see. Later that night, I was in my room, the one by the garage, when their voices rose from the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I didn't have to try. Brad's voice was a sharp, practical blade. "Absolutely not. Do you know what that place costs? It's over $50,000 a year. $50,000? I know, Brad. But she worked so hard." My mother's voice was weak, a token defense. "So she can work hard at the community college. She's smart. She'll be fine. We have Jenna's future to think about. Her prep school applications, her writing lessons, that's where the real money needs to go. You can't just throw away a college fund on a fantasy." A college fund. There was no college fund for me. There was only the account my grandparents had opened, the one they didn't know about. My mother was silent. Then, a sigh. "You're right. I know you're right." The next morning, Linda was all sweetness. She came to my room with a cup of coffee I didn't ask for. She sat on my bed, the mattress squeaking. "Paisley, honey, your father and I, Brad and I, are so proud of you. That letter is a real achievement." She took a sip. "But we have to be practical, realistic. You're so smart. You don't need a fancy private school name. Why don't you do your first 2 years at Maple Ridge Community? You'd save so much money. You could live at home. It's just more sensible. Don't be selfish, thinking only about yourself. We have a whole family to consider." Selfish. The word landed like a stone. I was selfish for wanting the future I had earned. She was asking me to shrink myself, to make myself smaller and cheaper, so that Jenna could continue to be expensive. I just nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. "Okay, Mom," I said. "I'll think about it. Thanks for the coffee." As soon as she left, I grabbed my backpack, walked to the park down the street, and pulled out my old flip phone. My hands were shaking so hard I had to dial the number 3 times. My grandmother Evelyn answered. "Grandma, it's me. I tried to hold it together. I tried to be the strong, practical person they wanted me to be, but my voice cracked on the 3rd word. "I got in," I whispered, and then the story just fell out. The letter, the kitchen, the $50,000, the community college. They said no, I finished, the tears hot and angry on my cheeks. They said it's for Jenna's future. The line was quiet for a long time. I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard my grandfather's voice, deeper, closer to the receiver. He must have picked up the extension in his workshop. "Paisley girl," he said. His voice was gravel. "You still have that bank book we gave you?" "Yes, Grandpa." "That's your running away money," he said, and I heard the faint, rare smile in his words. But it's not enough for this. Evelyn and I were going to handle this. But, Grandpa, it's too much. It's your retirement. What good is retirement if my granddaughter, the smartest damn person I know, gets told to sit down so a princess can have riding lessons, he said. His voice wasn't angry, it was final. We're going to sell the back 40 timber shares, and I'm cashing out the 78 GM stock. It's had a good run. We will handle the tuition. We will handle the dorm fees and the books. You just go and be the smartest person in the room. I was sobbing now, silent, ugly crying into my sleeve. One thing, he added, his voice serious. This is between us, your mother and Brad. They don't need to know where the money's coming from. As far as they're concerned, you got a full-ride, brilliant kid scholarship. Let them think that. It's cleaner. He was giving me more than tuition. He was giving me my freedom, my grandparents, who lived on a fixed income, who patched their own roof and drove a 15-year-old truck, were liquidating their assets. They were cashing in the quiet, careful wealth they had built over 50 years, and they were betting it all on me. My college years were a blur of cold wind and code. Chicago was a shock, a massive, glittering, indifferent city that smelled of exhaust and Lake Michigan. The Midwest Institute of Data Systems was as difficult as its reputation claimed. The other students seemed to be operating on a different level. They came from private academies. Their parents were executives or academics, and they wrote code with a casual fluency I had to fight for. I lived in a constant, low-grade state of panic and exhaustion. I was not going to fail. I was not going to waste a single one of my grandfather's dollars. My life was a spreadsheet of obligations. 18 credit hours, my work-study job in the campus library, 30 hours a week, shelving books in the freezing cold archive stacks. After that, from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m., I worked the graveyard shift for the university's tech support hotline. Yes, ma'am, I understand your paper is due, but I can't fix your printer from here. On weekends, I did freelance coding for a content mill, getting paid pennies per line to clean up someone else's sloppy PHP. My laptop was a refurbished model I bought with the last of the running away money, its battery life a constant source of anxiety. I carried that heavy black brick everywhere, my entire future balanced on its whirring hard drive. I ate instant noodles, bulk bin oatmeal, and day-old bagels from the campus coffee shop. I slept in the data lab on a cot I'd borrowed from the janitor's closet, waking up with the imprint of my keyboard on my cheek. I was thin, tired, and relentlessly focused. The idea came to me in my junior year, in a 400-level elective called Recommender Systems and Behavioral Modeling. We were studying the primitive algorithms that companies use to suggest products. If you liked this, you'll like that. It was simple, reactive. It was stupid. I sat in the back of the lecture hall, the professor's voice fading. I was thinking about the stock market, about the chess games with my grandfather. Don't just react, Paisley, he'd say. See the next 3 moves. Why were these systems only looking at what I just did? Why weren't they looking at the hesitation before the click, the time of day, the correlation between a small purchase in one category and a large, panicked sell-off in another? Why weren't they analyzing the behavior? The pattern I sketched it out on the back of a syllabus, a system that didn't just react, a system that predicted, a real-time engine that could analyze financial transactions not as isolated events, but as a continuous, evolving human story. It became my obsession. It was my senior project, my master's thesis, and the thing that kept me from sleeping for a year. I called it, in a fit of sleepless grandiosity, the Helix Pulse Engine. In my final year, I presented my prototype at a university tech fair. It was a disaster. The demo glitched. The screen fumbled. But one person saw what I was doing. A woman named Marian Torres, the CEO of a small, hungry fintech startup from Denver called Lumina Vector Analytics. They had just secured their Series B funding and were looking for talent that was, in her words, cheap and brilliant. She offered me an internship on the spot. I moved to Denver 2 weeks after I graduated, packing my entire life into the back of my grandfather's truck. which he'd insisted I take. Lumina Vector was a chaotic, brilliant mess. We worked 12-hour days, fueled by stale pizza and the sheer belief that we were building something revolutionary. Marion let me rebuild my Helix Pulse prototype on their servers. 6 months into my internship, I was hired full-time as a lead data scientist. The first thing I did with my first real paycheck was buy a plane ticket to Chicago and take my grandparents to the most expensive restaurant I could find. I sent money home every month after that, a few $100s, then a few thousand as my salary grew. I knew they didn't need it, they were frugal, but they'd bet on me, and I was going to make sure they saw the return on their investment. My grandmother Evelyn would call me, her voice warm. "Paisley, honey, this is too much. Your grandfather and I we're fine. We bought some new tomato plants." But I could hear her pride. My grandfather would get on the line. "Still driving the old truck? Paisley girl, runs fine. Glad you're not eating those poison noodles anymore." Then Helix Pulse launched. The first contract was with a mid-level regional bank. The second was with a national investment firm. By the end of the second year, 3 of the top 10 hedge funds on Wall Street were using my engine to trade billions of dollars. Marion Torres called me into her office. She didn't waste time. "The board's been looking at your numbers," she said, sliding a folder across her glass desk. "They're impressive. We're creating a new division, product and data. You're running it. Congratulations, Vice President." Inside the folder was a new contract. The salary was a number I couldn't comprehend, and the bonus was a life-changing sum. It was enough to buy a very nice, very beautiful apartment in downtown Denver, a penthouse, with windows that touched the ceiling. That night, my team took me out. They were cheering, raising glasses of champagne. I stepped out onto the bar's balcony, the Denver night air cool and thin, and I FaceTimed my grandparents from the party. I turned the phone around, showing them the celebration, the skyline, the life I was living. "Look, Grandpa," I said, my voice thick. "Look what you did." Grandma Evelyn was crying. Grandpa Thomas just stared at the screen, his face lit by the phone's glow. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice crackling over the speaker. "You did it, Paisley girl. A few more years, and that little company of yours might be worth as much as my old stock portfolio." We both laughed. I ended the call and looked at the city lights. I had a title, I had a home, I had a future I had built with my own hands, on the foundation they had given me. Later that week, I made the mistake of scrolling through Instagram. My mother had posted. It was a photo of Jenna, back home, posing with a new, expensive-looking handbag in front of a shiny red convertible. Brad had bought it for her for passing her midterms at the community college. My mother's caption, "So proud of my star, she shines so bright." Someone in the comments, a distant aunt, had asked, "How's Paisley? Haven't seen her in ages." My mother replied. 5 minutes later, "Oh, she's doing great. She's in Denver, doing some kind of tech thing. Always so busy." That one. Some kind of tech thing. I was a vice president. I had just architected a system changing financial markets. And to my family, I was a vague, busy afterthought, a footnote in Jenna's story. I was in a late-night diligence meeting with a private equity firm from Zurich. We were projected on a massive screen, the connection crisp and clear. They were grilling my data team about Helix Pulse's predictive accuracy, and I was in my element, deflecting, clarifying, and controlling the narrative. My work phone was on the desk. Dark. My personal phone, the one I kept for emergencies, was in my bag. It vibrated. Once, twice, I ignored it. Then it vibrated in a long, frantic buzz, the emergency override I'd set for my grandmother. I stood up, cutting off our chief financial officer mid-sentence. "Gentlemen, my apologies," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "A critical family matter. Marion, you have this?" I didn't wait for a reply. I walked out of the glass room, past the stunned faces of my team, and grabbed my phone. "Grandma, what's wrong?" Her voice was thin, stretched taut like a wire. Paisley, honey, it's your grandfather. He's at Maple Ridge General. It was his heart. The world compressed. The polished concrete floors of the Lumina Vector office, the smell of burnt coffee from the break room, the silent, twinkling lights of Denver outside the window, it all dissolved. How bad? I asked, already walking, grabbing my coat, my keys. They're calling it mild, she said, the word sounding foreign and unbelievable. A mild heart attack. He's awake. He's asking for you. I'm on my way. I left the Zurich team waiting. I left Marion with her mouth open. I was at the airport in 45 minutes, booked on the last red-eye to Chicago, and then rented a car to drive the 2 hours back to Maple Ridge. I didn't sleep. I just drove. The highway hypnosis punctuated by flashes of my grandfather's face, his strong hands, the smell of his pipe tobacco. I ran down the pale green, linoleum-floored hallway of Maple Ridge General. The place smelled of disinfectant and Jell-O. I found his room 307. My grandmother was asleep in a hard plastic chair, her head on her chest, a half-empty foam cup of water at her feet. He was in the bed, looking impossibly small. The man I knew as a granite force was pale, his skin thin and papery against the white sheets. Wires snaked from his chest to a monitor that beeped a steady, reassuring rhythm, but he was awake. His eyes found mine. "Paisley, girl," he whispered. It was barely a breath. I crossed the room and took his hand. It was cold, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, forcing my voice to stay light. "You're not allowed to scare us like that. I thought you were tougher." He let out a dry chuckle, which turned into a cough. "I had to see if you'd really show up." He squeezed my hand. "Still got work to do. Not going anywhere yet." "Good. Don't. Can't," he rasped, his eyes crinkling, even in the dim light. "Still gotta see you make CEO." I stayed for a week, my laptop unopened in my bag. I told Marion I was offline and ignored the hundreds of emails flooding my inbox. My grandmother was overwhelmed, so I took over. I sat at their small kitchen table, the one where I'd done homework as a kid, and started organizing. The sheer volume of paperwork was staggering. My grandmother just piled it in a shoebox. I began to sort medical bills, insurance policies, pension statements, and then the investment portfolios. I knew he was comfortable. I knew he'd been a smart investor. I did not know the extent. This wasn't just a healthy retirement. He had been quietly, methodically brilliant. He owned tracts of land I'd never heard of. His blue-chip stock portfolio was diverse and vast, worth well into 7 figures. He had certificates of deposit, municipal bonds, and several different mutual funds. My grandparents lived like simple, frugal people. They bought their vegetables at the farmer's market. They drove old cars. They patched their own roof. But on paper, they were millionaires, several times over. And as I sat there, creating a spreadsheet, a cold, sick realization washed over me. This was the money Brad Miller knew about. This was the future he was so keen on balancing. On the 3rd day, my grandmother went home to shower and rest in her own bed. I sat by my grandfather's side, reading him passages from a history book. He'd been quiet, mostly sleeping. Suddenly, he put his hand on my arm. "Paisley." "I'm right here. Grandpa?" "The will," he said, his voice stronger than it had been. "We need to talk about the will. Arthur has it." "Grandpa, don't. You need to rest. We can talk about this later." "No, now," he said, his old stubbornness returning. "I need you to know, Evelyn, she gets nervous about these things, but you understand numbers." He told me, right there in the quiet beeping of the hospital room, what was in his current, legally filed will, the one he and his lawyer, Arthur Blake, had drawn up 5 years prior and reviewed every year since. "Evelyn is taken care of, first," he said. "The house, a monthly income from the annuity she'll never have to worry, but the bulk of the estate, the land, the stock portfolio, it goes to you." I stared at him. "Me? Grandpa? No, that's not right. And I don't need it. I make a lot of money. Grandpa, I'm fine. His grip on my arm tightened. His eyes were fierce. This is not about what you need, he said, his voice low and intense. This is not a reward because you're successful. This is protection. This is my way of making sure he didn't have to say who can never, ever pull you down. It's my way of making sure you are never dependent on the kindness of people who have none. It's your inheritance. It's your father's legacy. Through me. He coughed, leaning back. There's a small fund for Jenna, a trust, but it's conditional. She doesn't get a dime until she finishes a 4-year degree and holds a job for 1 full year. It's a start, not a handout. I was speechless. It was an act of profound love, an act of justice. It was his way of fixing the balance, of finally, definitively, seeing me. I don't know what to say, Grandpa. Don't say anything, he said, closing his eyes. Just know, so you know what's real. The next day, the rest of the family arrived. They didn't come in quietly. They burst into the room as a unit. My mother, Linda, carrying a massive bouquet of lilies that immediately filled the room with a cloyingly sweet, funereal smell. Brad, in a crisp golf shirt, all white teeth and concern, and Jenna, in designer leggings, holding a giant, get-well-soon balloon shaped like a teddy bear. Daddy, my mother trilled, rushing to the bedside. Oh, Thomas, you gave us such a scare. Jenna followed, pushing past me to kiss his cheek. Grandpa Tom. We were so worried. I brought you some magazines. My grandfather looked tired. Brad clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of forced, masculine bonhomie. Tom. Good to see you upright, buddy. You're a tough old bird. You'll be back on your feet in no time. I sat in the corner chair, the one my grandmother had vacated, and became invisible. They didn't stay long, but their performance was flawless. Linda fussed over his pillows. Jenna took a selfie with him in the background, which I knew would be posted with a sad, worried love my grandpa caption. And Brad talked business. You know, Tom, he said, pulling a chair close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, man-to-man tone. An event like this, it really makes you think about the future, about legacy, about optimization. My grandfather just watched him, his eyes hooded. We really need to get you, me, and Arthur Blake in a room, Brad continued, oblivious. Go over the inheritance tax implications. With the portfolio you're sitting on, the government is going to take a massive bite if we don't structure it correctly. We need to talk trusts. Estate planning makes sure everything is optimized for the future. He was a real estate broker, talking about my grandfather's legacy as if it were a property to be flipped. I had to leave the room. I stood in the hallway, my fists clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. I was breathing hard, trying not to go back in there and throw him out, and that's when I heard them. My mother and Brad had stepped into the alcove by the elevators, just out of sight. They were arguing, their voices sharp whispers. He looks weak, Brad, my mother said. I don't think this is the time to push him. This is the only time, Linda, Brad hissed. He's mortal. He just got a reminder. Now is when we need to balance things. It's not fair to Jenna. You know it's not. But Paisley. What about Paisley? Brad shot back. She's loaded. You heard her. She's a vice president. She flies to Europe. She owns a penthouse. She doesn't need his money. It's practically an insult to her to leave her all of it. It should go to Jenna. Jenna needs the start. Jenna needs the lake house. It's about balancing. Brad, I don't know if he'll listen. He will listen, Brad said, his voice chillingly confident. He's an old man who just faced God. He'll want to make things right. You just need to back me up. We need to convince him to change the will, to make it fair. I was frozen. I was listening to them plot, right there in the hallway of the cardiac ward, to steal my protection, to rewrite my grandfather's love, all under the guise of fairness. After that day, the campaign began. Jenna became the angel of the hospital. She showed up every afternoon. After my grandmother and I had left for the evening, she brought him homemade cookies which he couldn't eat. She read him fashion magazines. She brought her iPad and showed him, according to the nurses, hours of her photos. She was performing the role of the dutiful, loving granddaughter, a role she had never once played in her life. My grandfather was discharged a week later. Looking better but frail. He was home, in his familiar chair. When the real paperwork started, he was signing things. My grandmother said Arthur Blake, his lawyer of 30 years, was visiting often. "Just updating some things. Paisley girl," he told me when I asked. "Setting up a small charitable fund for the local library, moving some investments around." He seemed tired. His signature, which had always been so strong, now looked thin, spidery. But he trusted Arthur. We all trusted Arthur. I had to go back to Denver. My company was on fire, and I couldn't be offline forever. I was packing my bag in the guest room Paisley's office the night before my flight. My grandfather was in his recliner. "Paisley," he called out. I walked into the living room. "Yeah, Grandpa?" He looked thoughtful. He started. Then he coughed, a deep, rattling cough that shook his frame. He took a sip of water. "I wrote a letter, for you, just in case." "In case of what?" "In case things get off. You'll know." He started to cough again, this time more violently. My grandmother rushed in with his medication, and he was too tired to speak. The conversation was lost. I thought about it on the plane. A letter. What did off mean? But the crisis seemed to be over. He was home. He was recovering. I returned to Denver and plunged back into my world of data, projections, and meetings. I was back for 3 weeks. The call came on a Saturday morning. It wasn't my grandmother. It was a paramedic. My grandfather had been in his workshop, trying to fix one of his old radios. He had fallen. This time, it wasn't a warning. This time, it was final. He was gone before I could even get to the airport. The funeral was a blur. It was a cold, rainy November day. The whole town of Maple Ridge seemed to be there. I stood under a black umbrella, watching the casket lower into the wet earth. My mother sobbed, leaning heavily on Brad, who looked somber and appropriate in a dark suit. Jenna was crying, her face a mask of perfect, photogenic grief. I just felt empty, numb. The anchor of my life was gone. The man who had protected me, who had seen me, was in that box. I felt a profound, hollow sense of loss. I had no idea. As I stood there in the rain, that the ground was about to be ripped out from under me, I had no idea that the real pain, the true betrayal, had not even begun. A week after the funeral, we were summoned to the office of Arthur Blake, attorney at law. His office was a fixture on Maple Ridge's small town square, lodged above the bakery. It was a space that hadn't been updated since at least 1980. The air was thick with the smells of old paper, stale pipe tobacco from a bygone era, and the faint, bitter tang of coffee from a perpetually burnt pot. The conference room was small, suffocating, paneled in dark, fake wood. The chairs were upholstered in a scratchy, mustard yellow fabric. I felt like I was sitting inside a shoebox. We filed in. A grim, uncomfortable procession. My grandmother, Evelyn, looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped, her face a map of fine cracks. She sat at the head of the long, polished table. My mother, Linda, and Brad sat together on one side. A united, grieving front. Brad wore a somber suit, his face composed into a mask of solemn responsibility. Jenna sat next to them, for once not on her phone. She was dressed in a simple, expensive-looking black dress, her hair pulled back, her blue eyes wide and tear-brimmed. She looked like a professional mourner. A few distant cousins, who I barely recognized, but who had clearly caught wind of a potential inheritance, filled the other chairs. And then there was me. I took the chair in the farthest corner, against the wall, next to a dying ficus plant. It felt appropriate. I was in the room, but not at the table. I sat clutching a cold, bitter cup of coffee that a secretary had handed me. my stomach churning. Arthur Blake entered. He was a man my grandfather had trusted for 40 years. He was old, like my grandfather, with a shock of white hair and watery blue eyes behind thick glasses. He carried a single, heavy, accordion-style folder. "Good morning," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "We are here today to read the last will and testament of Thomas Collins. This is always a difficult day, and I want to express my deepest condolences to you all, especially you, Evelyn." My grandmother nodded. Her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. Arthur cleared his throat, put on his reading glasses, and opened the folder. He began to read in a legal monotone, the whereas and hereinafter clauses washing over the room. He started with the standard declarations, the confirmation of his soundness of mind. Then, he moved to the first bequests. Mr. Collins directs that a sum of $50,000 be gifted to the Maple Ridge Public Library for the establishment of the Thomas Collins Children's Reading Fund. So far, so normal. I'd heard him talk about this. He loved the library. He directs that his tools and workshop contents be gifted to his friend and neighbor, Mark Peterson. I saw Cousin Mark nod, a sad smile on his face. All personal effects, clothing, and photographs are to be managed and distributed at the sole discretion of his wife, Evelyn Collins. Arthur paused. He looked down at the papers. He shifted in his chair. He looked up, not at Evelyn, but at the table at large, his gaze sweeping over all of us. "Now," he said, "we come to the disposition of the main estate, including all real property, liquid assets, and investment portfolios." This was it. The air in the room became thinner, heavier. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, tick, tock. Arthur reached into his folder and pulled out a separate, thinner sheaf of papers, bound by a fresh staple. "As his legal counsel," Arthur said, and his voice was suddenly strained, "I am bound to present and execute the most recent, legally filed document. While Mr. Collins and I had a long-standing will on file, it was superseded. This document is titled, Last Will and Testament, Revised. It was executed and filed with my office 1 week before his passing." My blood went cold. I flashed back to the hospital hallway. This is the only time. "Linda, he's mortal. He just got a reminder. Now is when we need to balance things." Brad sat up straighter in his chair. Jenna was looking down at her hands, but a small, satisfied smile was playing on her lips. My mother was staring at Arthur. Her breath held. Grandpa revised it. I heard my grandmother whisper, but no one acknowledged her. Arthur began to read, his voice faster now, as if he wanted to get through it. "I, Thomas Collins, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils, and declare this to be my last will and testament." He read through more legal jargon, and then he arrived at the meat of it. "Article 1 to my beloved wife, Evelyn Collins. I direct my executor to ensure the continuation of the pre-established annuity, guaranteeing her a monthly stipend of $3,000 for the remainder of her natural life." I did the math in my head. $3,000 a month. It was just enough to rent the small, one-bedroom apartment in the Maple Ridge Seniors Complex. It was enough to live on, but just barely. It was not the comfortable, secure future he had promised her. It was a pittance. My grandmother's face went white. She understood. Article 2. To my daughter, Linda Miller. Arthur continued. I grant the right to reside in the property located at 457 Pine Street, a small rental house he owned in town, for a period not to exceed 5 years from the date of my death, at which time the property will revert to the main estate. My mother looked confused, then disappointed. She was not getting the house. She was getting a temporary lease. Article 3, Arthur said, taking a deep, shuddering breath. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, including but not limited to the Collins Lake House and all adjoining properties, all stocks, bonds, securities, and accounts held at any financial institution. I give, devise, and bequeath to my granddaughter, Jenna Miller." The room stopped. The ticking clock stopped. My heart stopped. I looked at Jenna. She had her hand over her mouth, and her shoulders were shaking. She was performing. "Jenna Miller," Arthur repeated, as if to confirm, "is hereby named the sole heir to the Collins estate." Sole heir. The words echoed in the tiny, wood-paneled room. The cousins in the back began to murmur. My grandmother Evelyn made a small sound, like a bird being crushed, and put her hand to her chest. I looked at Arthur. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was shuffling the papers. He looked up, his gaze flicking to me for a fraction of a second. A look of, was it pity, apology, I couldn't tell. Then he looked back down. "As I said," Arthur mumbled, "I am bound to respect the most recent, validly executed document." Brad Miller put his hand on Jenna's back, patting her gently. He had a look of profound, solemn victory on his face. He leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Jenna finally looked up, her eyes flooded with perfect, crystalline tears. She looked around the room, her gaze skipping right over me. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice breaking beautifully. "Grandpa Tom, he trusted me. He trusted me with everything. I just won't let him down. I promise, I won't let him down." My mother, Linda, recovered first. The disappointment on her face melted away, replaced by a sudden, strategic pivot. She turned in her chair, not to her grieving mother, but to me. She leaned across the small gap, her voice a low, placating coo, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Paisley, honey," she said, her eyes full of a sickening, false sympathy. "I know this is confusing, but you have to understand. Your grandfather, he knew you were so successful. You have your big career, your whole life in Denver. He just wanted to help Jenna get a stable start. He wanted to balance things." Balance. The word from the hospital hallway. The word Brad had used. It was their word. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was full of glass. I just stared at her. I stared at the woman who was my mother, who was using my success as a justification for my erasure. My head was an echo chamber. This is protection. This is my way of making sure they can never pull you down. I want to protect you. His voice, in the hospital room, so fierce, so clear. And then this, a signature on a piece of paper, just days before he died, calling me a liar, calling his love for me a lie. The meeting broke. The cousins were complaining as they filed out. Brad was standing by Jenna, his hand on her shoulder, accepting condolences that looked more like congratulations. My grandmother, Evelyn, was the last to stand up. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Her hands were shaking. As I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was like a claw. She pulled me close, her voice a papery whisper in my ear, so low no one else could hear. "He never told me," she hissed, her eyes wild. "He never told me about this, Paisley. He wouldn't do this. Not to you, not to me." She looked around, at Arthur Blake packing his briefcase, at Linda and Brad walking out the door with their new heiress. "Something is wrong," she whispered. "But oh, God, Thomas, I'm too tired. I'm just too tired to fight them." She let go of my arm and walked out. Not a grieving widow, but a casualty. I don't know how I got to my car. I don't remember the elevator ride or the walk across the town square. I just remember being in the driver's seat of my rental car, the key in my hand, my whole body numb. It was dusk. The sky was a deep, bruised purple. I drove, on autopilot, out of town. I found myself on the winding gravel road that led to the lake, to his house, to her house. I parked at the scenic overlook, the one across the water, the one where my grandfather and I used to sit in his truck and watch for eagles. The lights were on, all of them. The house was blazing with light, a beacon in the twilight, and there was music. I could hear it, a faint, rhythmic thump, pulsing across the dark water. As I watched, A dozen cars pulled up the long driveway. People, young people, were getting out, laughing, carrying cases of beer, a party. She was holding a party. Jenna, the sole heir, the grieving granddaughter, celebrating her new house, her new life. I sat there in the dark, the engine off, the cold creeping in. I want to be clear. I didn't cry. I was not a crier. Crying was a luxury I'd never been afforded. It was a weakness my family exploited. I had learned, long ago in that room by the garage, to turn my pain into a hard, cold, quiet place inside me. I was used to being erased. I was used to being the ghost. I was, by all accounts, a professional at being left out. The money, the house, the stocks, they were numbers. I could make my own numbers. That's what I did. It wasn't the inheritance, it was the why. It was the fact that the one person in my life who had been my anchor, my protector, the man who had bet his life savings on my future had, in his final days, apparently agreed with them. He had agreed that I was a zero. He had looked at his life, his legacy, and he had signed his name to a document that said I was not a part of it. That was the part I couldn't understand. That was the part that hurt. Why, Grandpa? Why? After everything. Did you turn your back on me? I didn't stay in Maple Ridge. I didn't go back to the small apartment with my grandmother. I couldn't. I drove my rental car back to the Chicago airport. The numbness from Arthur's office a cold, protective shell. I boarded the first flight to Denver, took my seat in first class, and stared out the window at the dark clouds, feeling nothing. When I walked into my penthouse, the silence was absolute. The skyline of Denver glittered below, a city of a million lights, all of them indifferent. I had built this. I had earned this view, and it meant nothing. I dropped my keys in the glass bowl by the door, the sound sharp and too loud, and I went to work. I was in the office at 5 a.m. when my CEO, Marian Torres, arrived at her usual 8. I was already in the main conference room, my face lit by the glow of 3 screens, deep in a data set. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. Marian is a woman who appreciates efficiency over emotion. "You look," she said, "like you just saw a ghost." "I'm fine," I said, not looking up. "Just family stuff. My grandfather's estate was settled." And I finally looked at her. "And it's settled." I clicked a window closed. "We need to talk about the European integration. The Frankfurt security protocols are weak, and it's creating a data lag." Marian held my gaze for a solid 10 seconds. She is a pattern whisperer in her own right. She knew I was deflecting, hiding something massive, but she also respects a closed door. "Fine," she said, walking in. "Let's talk about Frankfurt, but Paisley. You smell like an airplane. Go home and shower after this." I didn't. I worked. For the next 8 months, I plunged into my work with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Work was my refuge because it was meritocratic. The code either ran or it failed. The data was clean or it was corrupt. There were no gray areas, no emotional manipulations, no secret revisions. At Lumina Vector, I was not invisible. I was the architect. Helix Pulse boomed. That week, fueled by grief and rage, I re-architected the entire predictive model for the European market. It was a masterpiece of cold, brutal logic. A consortium of banks in London and Berlin signed an exclusive 3-year, $150 million contract. The press followed. I was invited to give the keynote address at the Global FinTech Summit in Singapore. A reporter from a major business journal shadowed me for a week and wrote a sleek, flattering profile. They dubbed me the Pattern Whisperer. I was the woman who could see the future in the machine. I was a celebrated success, a woman who could predict the movements of global markets. I just couldn't understand the last 5 days of my grandfather's life. While I was building my empire, Jenna was busy curating hers. I hadn't blocked her social media, not yet. It was a form of self-punishment, a way to pick at the wound. Her Instagram feed transformed into the portfolio of a professional heiress. The Collins Lake House, my grandfather's sanctuary. The place that smelled of old wood and cherry tobacco was her first project. She posted a long, high-speed makeover video set to some insipid pop song. The warm, pine-paneled walls he had installed with his own hands were painted a sterile, glossy white. The comfortable, overstuffed armchairs my grandmother loved were gone, replaced by low, gray, minimalist sofas that looked like they belonged in a morgue's waiting room. She geotagged it as the Collins Estate by the lake. She posted drone footage of the new $60,000 wakeboarding boat she'd bought, its engine cutting a sharp white scar across the placid, dark water. She threw parties. The Collins Estate Summer Kickoff, the July 4th Heiress Bash. She hired professional photographers for Heiress Life photo shoots. Jenna in a white bikini on the dock, Jenna laughing with champagne, Jenna looking pensively at the sunset, as if she had a single thought in her head. The posts got thousands of likes. Brad, naturally, was her co-producer. He quit his job at the small-time brokerage. He opened a new private investment firm, Miller Collins Holdings. His only qualification was that he was the stepfather of the new millionaire. He used my grandfather's stocks, the portfolio Thomas had built over 50 years, as his firm's foundational proof of success, hosting seminars for local investors on building generational wealth. And my mother, Linda, was always in the background, a smiling, complicit ghost. There she was, in a blurred background shot, holding a tray of appetizers. There she was, pouring wine for Jenna's friends, her face beaming with the reflected glory. She was, finally, the mother of the star. I watched all this from the cold altitude of my penthouse, late at night, a glass of whiskey in my hand. I didn't feel jealousy. That wasn't the word. I didn't want the boat. I didn't want the white-on-white living room. I felt alienated. I felt like I was watching a twisted play about my own family. A play where my character had been written out in the final draft. It was a profound, cosmic erasure. One night, I watched a story where Jenna and her friends were taking shots. Using my grandmother's antique crystal glasses, I hit block on Jenna, on Brad, on my mother. I tried to build a wall. My life was Denver, data, and success. Their life was a tacky inherited performance. The wall held. Until the email. It was a Tuesday. I was drowning in spreadsheets. An automated notification hit my inbox. It was from the Maple Ridge Community Bank, the small, local institution my grandfather had used for 50 years. I had been on his accounts once, as an emergency contact, a leftover from my college days so he could wire me money for books. I assumed I'd been scrubbed from the system along with his memory. The email was a generic, year-end update to their privacy policy, but it was addressed to me, Paisley Hernandez. And in the reference line, it listed me as secondary contacts signatory on 3 accounts: the Thomas Collins Investment Trust, C, the Collins Timber Holdings account, and a long-term certificate of deposit. My blood turned to ice. Those accounts, those were the big ones. That was the portfolio. That was the land. According to the will, they belonged 100% to Jenna. My name should not be within 1,000 miles of them. It was a clerical error. It had to be. My fingers, however, moved with a will of their own. I picked up my phone and dialed the bank's main line. I got a polite, young rep named Kevin. "Hi," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Paisley Hernandez. I received an automated email listing me as a contact on accounts for Thomas Collins. Mr. Collins passed away. It's been almost a year. I'm calling to have my name removed. It's an error." "Yes, ma'am. I can help with that. Let me pull up the file. Collins, Thomas, and Hernandez. Paisley, secondary." "Okay." I heard the clack, clack, clack of his keyboard. "Huh, that's weird." What's weird? My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, gave a single, hard thump. "Well, ma'am, I see the death certificate was filed, and I see the probate court order executing the new will, but in our legal system. The original will, the one from Looks like, about 6 years ago, it's still flagged as pending final archival. The system hasn't fully updated to close out the old directives. It looks like yes. It looks like the new will was processed, but the old one was never legally resolved and superseded. That's why you're still getting emails. He laughed. A small, nervous customer service laugh. You're telling me our database is a mess. Looks like some kind of internal transition error. I am so sorry for the confusion. Ms. Hernandez, I'll manually purge you from the contact list right now. My apologies for the oversight. Thank you, Kevin, I said, and hung up. A transition error. The old will, still flagged, not resolved. It was nothing. It was a computer glitch. A lazy database administrator. I told myself that, over and over. 2 weeks later, I flew to Chicago for a meeting and found myself driving the 2 hours to Maple Ridge. I didn't go to the lake. I went to the Maple Ridge Seniors Apartment Complex. My grandmother Evelyn's new home was small, clean, and smelled of baby powder and instant coffee. Her entire vibrant life had been compressed into 500 square feet of beige carpet. She looked smaller. The fire I'd seen in her eyes at the law office, the flicker of something is wrong, had burned out. She was, as she had said, just tired. We sat at her small Formica dinette, drinking tea. I didn't tell her about the bank. I didn't want to upset her. As I was getting my coat to leave, she put her frail hand on my arm. "Paisley," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "I keep thinking about that day at the hospital, when he was so worried." "Grandma, no, listen." Her eyes sharpened. "Just a little." After Brad and your mother left his room, he was agitated. He said to me, "Evelyn, I need to make sure Arthur has the letter for Paisley." My breath caught. "He said it," she continued. "Just like that. A letter for Paisley, in case they try to interfere. He said that word. Paisley. Interfere. I never saw a letter. I asked Arthur. After. I asked if Thomas had left anything else for me. Or for you. He just looked sad and said, 'Evelyn, the revised will is the final word.' He never mentioned a letter. I'm just an old woman, misremembering." I kissed her cheek. "It's okay, Grandma. You've been through a lot." I drove back to the airport in a fog. But my mind was no longer foggy. It was sharp. I am the pattern whisperer. My entire life, my entire success, is built on finding signals in the noise. Noise. A grieving old woman, misremembering. Signal. She repeated the exact phrase I remembered him starting to say, "A letter, for you." Noise. A lazy database admin at a small-town bank. Signal, the old will, the one that protected me, was never legally resolved in their system. A transition error that left my name attached to the money. A glitch in the bank, a lost letter, a last-minute revision of a will that perfectly benefited the exact 2 people I had overheard plotting in a hospital hallway. For the first time, a new emotion pushed through the grief and the rage. It was cold, clean, and analytical. It was suspicion. What if he didn't betray me? What if he was betrayed? But the thought that followed was a wave of exhaustion. What could I do? Sue my own family. Drag my grandmother, in her beige apartment, through a long, public, expensive court battle I had no proof. Just a glitch and a ghost of a memory. I had a life, a career. I had to let it go. I tried. I really, truly tried. I went back to Denver. I buried the suspicion. I told myself the story was over. It stayed buried for another 2 months. Until 1 a.m. on a Wednesday, I was working late. My mind numb. I took a break. Scrolling through a generic news feed, an algorithm, unaware of my blocks, suggested a live video from a local Maple Ridge account. Maple Ridge Vintage Finds. I clicked. The face on the screen, lit by a harsh fluorescent glare, was Jenna's. She was in a storage unit. She was giggling, holding up items to her phone's camera. "Hey guys. So, Grandpa Tom had so much old junk. I'm selling off some of these antiques to make room for my new aesthetic. All sales final Venmo or Cash App." She held up an old brass ship in a bottle. "This is old. $10. She held up a box of my grandmother's porcelain china. "This is pretty, I don't know. $50. And then she reached down, off camera, and grunted slightly. She lifted it, the old, hand-carved wooden chess set, the one he taught me on, the one with the chipped queen and the missing pawn he'd whittled a replacement for. "Okay, this is a chess thing," she said, holding it up. The pieces rattled inside. "It's heavy. Kinda smells weird. $100. Anyone $100 for this vintage board?" I didn't just close the tab. I snapped my laptop shut. The click echoed in the 33rd floor silence. That wasn't grief. It wasn't suspicion. It was pure, undiluted rage. This wasn't about me anymore. This wasn't about my inheritance, or my feelings, or my erasure. She was selling his history. She was selling him, for pocket change, in a storage unit, on a live stream. He had been betrayed, and that feeling, that cold, hard certainty that someone had wronged him, that was something I could not, and would not, let go. It was a Tuesday night, 11:48 p.m. The rage from the live stream had cooled, hardening into a solid, cold resolve. I was in my home office, the city of Denver, a silent, glittering carpet of light far below me. I wasn't just working. I was hunting. I was running a deep analysis, not on bank data, but on every public record I could find connected to Brad Miller, Jenna Miller, and Miller Collins Holdings. I was looking for a crack, a mistake. My personal phone, the one I kept for emergencies, vibrated on the polished desk. The screen lit up, a number I didn't recognize. The area code was from Maple Ridge. My first instinct was to ignore it. It was almost midnight. No good news ever came from Maple Ridge. But the cold resolve in my gut made my hand move. I picked it up. "Hello?" My voice was flat, tired, a long silence on the other end. Just the sound of static, of an old connection. Then, a man's voice, old and dry as paper. It was hesitant, hoarse, but clear. "Paisley. Is this Paisley Hernandez?" My spine straightened. I knew that voice. I had not heard it in almost a year. "This is she." "Who is this?" Another pause. The voice came back, stronger. "Paisley, this is Arthur Blake, your grandfather, Thomas Collins's lawyer." The air in my penthouse became thin and sharp. My heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm of anger, gave a painful lurch. "Mr. Blake," I said, my voice all ice and business. "It's late." "Yes," he said, and he sounded agitated. He sounded frail. "Yes, I know. My profound apologies for the hour, but I could not let this wait another day." "What is it?" "We need to meet," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I need you to come to Maple Ridge, as soon as you can, tomorrow, if possible." "Mr. Blake, I run a division of a major company. I can't just fly across the country on a whim. What is this about?" "It's..." He stopped. I heard him take a deep, shuddering breath. "It's about your grandfather's will. I need you to come, and I need you to bring your grandmother Evelyn. Just you, and her, no one else. Do you understand, no one else?" My hand was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. "Mr. Blake," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "We were in your office. The will was read. The will was executed. As far as I'm concerned, that conversation is over." The silence on the line was deafening. It stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. I thought he had hung up. "Paisley," he finally said, and his voice was a raw, broken whisper. "That's exactly why I need to talk to you. Please." I was on the 6 a.m. flight. I didn't pack a bag. I just walked out of my apartment, got in my car, and drove to the airport. I landed in Chicago, rented the fastest car they had, and was in Maple Ridge by 10. I picked up my grandmother from her beige, sterile apartment. She looked terrified. I hadn't told her why. I just said, "Arthur Blake called. He needs to see us. Now." She didn't ask a single question. She just grabbed her coat. The bakery beneath Arthur's office was wafting the smell of cinnamon buns into the cold morning air. It made me sick. We climbed the dusty, narrow stairs. His office door was open. He was standing there, waiting. He looked ruined. The man I remembered from the reading, the one who was so composed and procedural, was gone. This man looked 100 years old. His white hair was uncombed, his suit rumpled. His eyes were red-rimmed and panicked. "Evelyn, Paisley, thank God." He ushered us in, not to the conference room, but to his private, cluttered office. He didn't just close the door, he turned the heavy, old-fashioned lock. The click echoed in the small space. He went to his desk and switched his phone to Do Not Disturb, the small red light glowing. "Please," he said, gesturing to 2 client chairs that were cracked with age. We sat. My grandmother was twisting her hands in her lap. I sat as still as a stone. Arthur Blake sat behind his massive mahogany desk. He didn't speak. He just pulled a thick accordion file toward him. It was the same one from the reading, the Thomas Collins file. He put his hands flat on the desk. He looked at my grandmother, then at me. "I am going to say something," he began, his voice shaking, "that I have never had to say in 45 years of practicing law. I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable, serious mistake." My grandmother gasped. "And," he continued, his eyes finding mine, "someone took advantage of that mistake. Someone took advantage of me, and they took advantage of Thomas." "What are you talking about? Arthur?" my grandmother whispered. "What mistake?" He opened the file. "The will, the revised will, the one I read." He looked at me. "Paisley, you were there. You heard me say that document was executed 1 week before your grandfather's death." "I remember," I said. What I did not say, what I was too ashamed to admit at the time, was the circumstances of that execution. He leaned forward. "About a week before Thomas passed, yes, I received a request for an update, an urgent, final update, but Thomas did not come to my office to sign it." A cold dread, heavier and darker than anything I had felt before, was uncoiling in my stomach. "He was too weak to travel, I was told," Arthur said, his voice dripping with self-loathing. "They told me he had signed it at home, in front of a notary they provided, and they just needed me to file it, to make it official." "Who?" I said. The word was not a question. It was a demand. "Who brought you the papers? Arthur?" my grandmother asked, her voice suddenly strong. Arthur Blake looked down at his desk. "It was Jenna Miller," he said. "She came in, looking distraught. She was with her stepfather, Brad. He did all the talking. He said Thomas was lucid but fading, and that he was panicked about making sure Jenna was protected. They presented the document. It had a signature. It had a notary stamp. And you just took it," I asked. "I have known your family, Evelyn, for my entire life," he said, his eyes pleading with my grandmother. "I've known Linda since she was a girl. I trusted them. It seemed plausible. Thomas was sick. I looked at the signature. I gave it a cursory glance. I compared it to an old file. It looked close enough. I didn't demand Thomas be present. I didn't follow the full, standard procedure. I notarized my own copy, and I filed it. It was a shortcut, an act of trust." "And you were wrong," I said. "I was a fool," he whispered. He was quiet for a moment. "It would have ended there," he said. "I would have retired. A fool, and never known, except for one thing." He held up a sheaf of papers. "We are upgrading our office. A new, digital storage system, cloud-based, secure, a young paralegal, a kid just out of law school, has been scanning every closed file from the last 10 years. He slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a log sheet. "The paralegal found a discrepancy," Arthur said. "He flagged it for me last night. He found, in your grandfather's file, 2 scanned versions of his last will and testament, both dated as updated on the same day." He slid a second paper over. It was a side-by-side comparison. "The first," he said, pointing, "is the one they brought me, the one I filed, the one I read. The second is the one that was already in the system, the one from 5 years ago, the one I thought they were replacing. But look." He pushed a magnifying glass toward me. "Look at the metadata on the scan log. The first file, the revised one. It was scanned from an external IP. The metadata is crude. It's incomplete. My paralegal. This kid?" He said the signature block looks like I'm quoting a crude, low-resolution copy-paste. He said it's missing the embedded digital signature from my firm's official scanner. My mind was racing. This was my world. Data, metadata, patterns. "And the calls," Arthur said, his voice rising, gaining a desperate, frantic energy. "That's what kept me up all night. The calls." He pulled out another log. The paralegal, he was cross-referencing everything. He checked our internal call log system. Paisley Thomas called this office. Twice, after the date he supposedly signed that new will. "What?" my grandmother said, standing up. "He called to speak to me," Arthur said. "The log shows he was agitated. He was asking about the update. He was asking about the revisions he had discussed with me. But Paisley, I never spoke to him. I never got those messages." "How?" I said. "They were routed," Arthur said, his face pale. "Our new phone system, they were routed to a secondary line, and the log says they were handled by an associate." "Who?" "A woman named Sarah Jensen," Arthur said. "She was a junior associate. She handled real estate closings. She quit. Very suddenly. About 6 months ago, moved to Florida. Said it was for family." He looked at me, his eyes dead serious. "I ran her name, Paisley, just before you got here. She was the closing associate on 2 of Brad Miller's real estate deals." The room was silent. The air was thick. The pattern was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. Brad, Jenna, a junior lawyer, a faked document. "But how did you find out?" my grandmother whispered, sitting back down, her hand on her heart. Arthur didn't answer. He reached deep into the accordion file. He pulled out one last item. It was an envelope, a simple, business-sized envelope, made of thick, cream-colored paper. It was sealed with a wafer of red wax, and on the front, in my grandfather's unmistakable, strong, blocky handwriting, were a few simple words. "For Paisley," I read out loud, my voice trembling. "To be opened by Arthur if anything feels off about my will." "It was scanned into the system," Arthur stammered, "but it was mislabeled. It was in a digital folder titled Thomas Collins, Misc Correspondence. Not in the will testament file. It was lost. We lost it. Until this morning, when the paralegal was auditing all Miss C files. He held the envelope, the physical, original envelope, in his hand. "He gave this to me," Arthur said. "In the hospital. He told me to just hold on to it. I thought he was on medication. I filed it. I forgot." He slid the heavy paper envelope across the mahogany desk. It stopped, right in front of me. My grandmother was crying, openly, her shoulders shaking. I looked at Arthur. He looked at me. "Paisley," he said, his voice now just a flat, legal, terrified statement. "I don't know what is in that envelope, but it is a testamentary document. If I open it, as the executor, it will invalidate my own previous actions. It will force a legal review. It will start a war." He looked at me, at the vice president, at the girl who had been erased. "Do you want to know what your grandfather wrote in here? Because if we open this envelope, Paisley, there is no going back. Your life, your mother's life, Jenna's life, it all changes. Everything will have to be latlai tudo." I looked at the envelope. For Paisley. He hadn't betrayed me. He had known. He had seen it coming. He had tried to warn us. I thought of the chessboard. I thought of the live stream. I thought of my grandmother, in her beige apartment. I put my hand on the envelope. The wax seal was cool. I looked at my grandmother. She had stopped crying. She was watching me, her eyes fierce, the way they had been in the hospital. She nodded. Once, a sharp, clear gesture. I pushed the envelope back toward Arthur Blake. "Open it," I said. "I've spent my whole life being erased from my family. I have nothing left to lose." Arthur Blake's hands, spotted with age, trembled as he took a small, silver letter opener from his desk. He slipped the blade under the red wax seal. The crackle of the heavy paper breaking open was the only sound in the small, musty office. It sounded like a gunshot. He unfolded the single sheet of thick, cream-colored stationery. He cleared his throat and handed the letter to my grandmother. Her hands were shaking too much to hold it. "Paisley," she whispered, pushing it toward me. "You read it. He wrote it for you." I took the letter. The handwriting was his, not the thin, spidery script from his final days, but the strong, deliberate, blocky letters he used when he was making a point. The ink was a dark, confident blue. He had written it at night. I could picture him, sitting at his old roll-top desk, the small green banker's lamp casting a pool of light. The rest of the house, dark and silent. "My dear Paisley," it began, "I am writing this in the middle of the night, and I hope you never have to read it. I hope this letter rots in Arthur's file cabinet. But if you are reading this, Paisley girl, it means that something has gone very, very wrong. It means that what I'm afraid of has come to pass. So first, I need you to listen to my voice, not theirs. I would never, never cut you out. You are the daughter of my heart and the smartest person I have ever known. Do not, for 1 second, believe I betrayed you." I had to stop. A sound, half sob, half gasp, escaped my throat. The last year of pain, the belief that he had turned on me was a physical weight, and it felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. My grandmother put her hand on my arm. I took a breath and continued. "They have been working on me, your mother and Brad. They've been here, at the house, more than they've been in the last 10 years. They talk about fairness. They talk about balancing things for Jenna. They say you are rich and that Jenna needs a start. Jenna herself has been a miracle of sudden affection, bringing me cookies and showing me her photographs, her eyes always drifting to the good silver. I am old, Paisley, but I am not a fool. I see what they are doing. I know what Brad is. He's a hollow man, and he wants to fill his pockets with what I built. And your mother, she just wants her new family to be the winning one. I am telling Arthur, and I am telling you in this letter, what my will is, what my true will is. Evelyn is protected, first and always. The conditional fund for Jenna, the one where she has to graduate and work, that stays. It is what she needs, not what she wants. All the rest of it, the stocks, the land, the lake house that your father loved, it is yours. Paisley, not as a reward, as a shield. It is the armor I am leaving you because I won't be here to protect you myself. I am afraid. I am going to see Arthur tomorrow and give him this, and make him swear. I am also going to try and make the original will safer, but I am sick, and I am tired, and I feel them circling. Brad has been asking about my signature, about power of attorney. If you are reading this, it means they found a way. It means someone has bent the will of the dead for the greed of the living. So, here is my last request. Use your intelligence. You have a mind like a steel trap. Use it. Find the truth. But do not let this turn you into them. Do not let this hatred eat you. Fix this, and then go live your life, the one you built, the one I am so damn proud of. I love you, Paisley girl. Don't you ever doubt it. Grandpa Tom. The letter fell from my fingers onto the desk. I was not relieved. I was not happy. I was incandescent with rage. It was a clean, white-hot fury that burned away the last year of doubt, grief, and confusion. He hadn't betrayed me. They had betrayed him. They had used his final, weakest days to commit the one act he had spent his life trying to prevent. They had taken his love and twisted it into a weapon against me. They had put him in the ground and then danced on his grave, selling his memory for $100 on a live stream. My grandmother was weeping silently, her face in her hands. I looked at Arthur Blake. He looked like a man on a gallows. "So," I said, my voice cold and low, "what happens now?" Arthur took a deep breath. He was no longer a panicked old man. He was a lawyer, facing a crisis. "We have two paths, Paisley," he said. "Two, and you must choose. Path one," he said, holding up a finger, "is the path of least resistance. We can discover this letter. We can use it to quietly negotiate a settlement with Miss Miller and Mr. Miller. We can avoid a public trial. We would file a correction to the probate. They would likely agree to a significant redistribution to avoid public humiliation and criminal charges. It would be contained. You would get a portion of your inheritance. Your grandmother would be made comfortable, and it would all go away." "And path two?" I asked. "Path two," he said, his face grim, "is war. We file a petition with the probate court to have the revised will thrown out entirely, on grounds of fraud, forgery, and undue influence. We present all of it, the letter, the metadata, the call logs, the testimony of the paralegal, my testimony, admitting my own negligence. We will have to depose your mother, Brad, and Jenna. We will have to sue them. It will be public, it will be ugly, and it will be expensive. And if we win, the revised will is invalidated, and the original will, the one your grandfather described in his letter, becomes the only one. You would inherit everything, just as he intended." He leaned forward. "But I am warning you, Paisley, this will tear your family apart. Permanently." I almost laughed. "What family?" I looked at my grandmother. She had stopped crying. She was watching me, her eyes clear. She knew what this meant. It meant facing her daughter, Linda, in a courtroom. It meant testifying against her. I turned back to Arthur. "Mr. Blake, let me understand. Path one, we let them get away with a slap on the wrist. We let them keep a portion of what they stole, just so we can avoid a fight. It's a practical, clean solution," he began. "It's not a solution," I snapped. "It's a transaction. Path two. We do path two." "Paisley," he said. "You must be sure." "I am sure," I said. Standing up, I was pacing now. My mind was moving fast, the data points clicking into place. If we take path one, we are doing exactly what they want. We are balancing things. We are letting them win. You will live the rest of your life knowing you let this happen, and I will live the rest of mine, knowing I let them get away with it. My grandfather deserves better. His memory deserves better. He wrote that letter, begging for help. We are going to help him. We are going to fix this. We are going to war. My grandmother Evelyn stood up, her small frame surprisingly rigid. "He has to face his daughter," she said, her voice small but firm. "I can face mine." A look of profound, pained relief washed over Arthur Blake's face. It was as if he had been absolved. "All right," he said. "Then we begin." "No," I said. "Not we. Not just yet." They both looked at me. "Mr. Blake," I said, "your team has done a good job finding the noise. Now, let me find the signal. You are a small-town lawyer. They are amateurs. I am a vice president of data. This is what I do." I pointed at his new computer. "You have a digital case file." "Yes." "The scans, the logs, the paralegal's report." "Yes, of course." "I want access," I said. "Supervised. If you have to. I don't want to just see the report. I want to see the raw data. I want to see the file extensions, the timestamps, the IP addresses. They were clumsy. Mr. Blake? I guarantee you, they were clumsy." For the next 4 hours, I sat at that paralegal's desk, with Arthur watching over my shoulder. My grandmother made coffee, her hands steady. It was, as I suspected, a joke. "There," I said, pointing to the screen. I was in the law firm's server logs. "The revised will, the PDF scan. Look at the metadata." Arthur leaned in. I don't see. Right there, I said. Upload source IP address 72.144xx timestamp 4:03 p.m. I was already running the IP in a separate tracer. This IP address doesn't belong to your law firm. It doesn't belong to the hospital. It doesn't belong to my grandfather's house. It resolves to a commercial block on Main Street, Maple Ridge. I pulled up the business registry, specifically to the address of Miller Collins Miller Real Estate, Brad's old office. They didn't even file it from your building. They scanned it and emailed it to that associate, Sarah Jensen, who then uploaded it to your system from her computer. They faked a will, and they uploaded it from their own office. My God, Arthur whispered. We're not done, I said. I was typing, my fingers flying. We need a handwriting expert, not just a glance, a real one. I have a man in Chicago, Arthur said. Get him, I said. Get him the revised signature, and get him this. I pulled up the bank's website. I want every check my grandfather signed in the last 6 months of his life. Get the digital images from the bank. We need a baseline. We need to compare the tremor. While he made the call, I kept digging, and then I remembered Cousin Mark, the man who got the tools, the man who had been my grandfather's friend. I found his number in my grandmother's old address book. I stepped into the hallway. Mark, this is Paisley Hernandez. Yes, it's been a long time. I have a strange question. You were with my grandfather a lot, before he passed. Did he ever talk to you about Brad, or about his will? Mark was quiet for a moment. Paisley, he said, his voice low. Your grandfather was a good man, but he was worried. He told me, one night, after dinner, he said, I'm worried about that son-in-law of mine, Mark. He's slick. He's trying to bend things. And then he said, good thing I had Arthur write in a few lines of protection, a little insurance policy, just in case. I didn't know what he meant. Paisley, I figured he knew what he was doing. A few lines of protection, the letter. I went back into the office. The handwriting expert was on speakerphone. Send me the files, the expert said. But from what you're describing, a last-minute signature, brought in by a third party, with a tremor that's inconsistent, that's a classic red flag for imitation. I hung up. I looked at Arthur and my grandmother. I had it. The IP address, the witness, the expert. And the letter, I was ready to make my move. Okay, I said, pulling my laptop out of my bag and opening a new project management file. Here's the plan. We are not going to attack them. We are not going to send a single angry email. We are, I said, going to invite them to a meeting. Arthur looked confused. A meeting, Paisley. We are filing with the probate court. We have to. We will file, I said. You will draft the entire petition. We will have all of our evidence, the letter, the IP log, the preliminary expert report ready to go. We will attach it, but we will not click file. Not yet. I turned to my grandmother. Grandma, where is Jenna living? At the lake house, she said, her voice full of distaste. Perfect, I said. Arthur, you are going to call Brad, not Jenna. Brad, you are going to tell him that, in your review of the estate, you have found a significant tax optimization strategy, something that could save the Miller Collins estate a great deal of money. You are going to tell him that it is complex, and it requires an in-person, all-family meeting. You will invite them to host it. At the lake house, Arthur said, a slow smile dawning on his face. He was starting to get it. At the lake house, I confirmed. We'll set a family tax consultation. You, me, and Grandma will be there. You will also bring a colleague, a representative from the probate court, someone who is just there to listen in on the complex tax advisory. We will present our case, not to a judge, but to them. We will give them one, and only one, opportunity to see the evidence, to see that they have been caught. What's the point? Paisley, my grandmother asked. The point, I said, is to watch them self-destruct. The point is to give them the chance, on tape, in front of a court witness, to either confess, lie, or blame each other. And they will blame each other. Brad will throw Jenna under the bus. Jenna will cry and blame Brad, and we will get all of it. Then we file the petition, complete with their admissions. I closed my laptop. My grandfather taught me to play chess. He said, "Never just react. This is our move. We are not just taking back his money, we are taking back his name." I walked out of Arthur Blake's office, my grandmother on my arm. The air on the town square was cold and sharp. I looked at the familiar, sleepy buildings, but I wasn't in Maple Ridge. I was on a battlefield. I looked out, past the bakery, toward the road that led to the lake. I thought of my grandfather. I was no longer the little girl, banished to the room by the garage. I was no longer the invisible woman, erased from a will. I was the shield. I was the armor. And I was, finally, ready to fight. Brad Miller took the bait, just as I knew he would. Arthur Blake's phone call, perfectly pitched with a lawyer's dry concern over significant tax liabilities and new optimization strategies, was a siren song for a man like Brad. The idea of losing a single dollar of my grandfather's money to the IRS was an offense. The idea of saving money was his entire personality. He not only agreed to the meeting, he insisted on hosting it. "We should do it at the estate," he'd said, his voice full of casual ownership. "Easier for my team to join." Jenna, of course, was delighted. A professional meeting was just another performance. So, on a cold, bright Thursday morning, we drove up the long, gravel driveway. My grandmother sat in the passenger seat of Arthur's sedan, her back as straight as a steel rod. I was in the back, my laptop bag on my knees. It contained nothing but a hard drive, a digital voice recorder, and my phone. The house, his house, looked different. Jenna's makeover was complete. It looked like a sterile, white and gray box, scrubbed clean of all warmth, all history. She had even painted the front door a glossy, offensive black. She greeted us at that door, not with a hug, but with an air of professional importance. She was a CEO, receiving her board. "Arthur," she said, nodding. "Grandma, Paisley." Her voice was cool. She was the heiress. We were the visitors. The living room, the one that used to smell of wood smoke and old books, now smelled of vanilla-scented candles. The comfortable, worn furniture was gone, replaced by a massive, gray sectional sofa. A long, dark wood dining table, clearly new, had been set up as a conference table, complete with notepads and glasses of water. Jenna had even put a large minimalist vase with 2 white orchids in the center. It was all a stage set. Brad was at the head of the table, looking every bit the private investment firm president. He wore an expensive-looking blue blazer, no tie. He was flanked by 2 men in identical suits. His financial advisors, my mother, Linda, was there, but she wasn't at the table. She was by the new, stainless steel coffee machine, playing hostess. "Coffee, Arthur Paisley?" she asked, her voice bright and brittle. "No, thank you, Linda," I said. We took our seats. My grandmother, Arthur, and I sat on one side. Across from us sat Brad, Jenna, and the 2 suits, and at the end of the table, a neutral party, was a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s, whom Arthur introduced as my colleague, Mr. Graves, a specialist in complex estate trusts. Mr. Graves was, in fact, a clerk from the county probate court, attending as an official observer. He nodded at everyone and opened his briefcase. For a moment, we all just sat there, the silence punctuated by the clinking of my mother's coffee cups. "Well," Brad said, leaning back, all executive charm. "Let's get started. Arthur, you said you had some strategies for us. The estate tax on this place is, well, it's significant. I'm all ears on how we can optimize, as you put it." Arthur Blake, who I had only ever seen as a flustered, panicked old man, was transformed. He was in his element. He was a lawyer. He placed his laptop on the table and connected it to the massive flat-screen television Jenna had installed over the fireplace. "Indeed, Brad," Arthur said, his voice dry and procedural. "The Collins estate is complex. Before we can discuss future strategies, we must have a complete understanding of the assets as they currently stand." The first slide appeared. Overview. Collins estate assets. It listed the house, the land, the stock portfolio. Brad and Jenna nodded, looking smug. One of Brad's suits was already taking notes. "The total value, as of the last probate filing, is here," Arthur continued. "Slide 2, a very large number." "Now," Arthur said, his thumb clicking the remote. "The entire disposition of these assets is, of course, governed by the primary testamentary document, the will." The next slide was blank. Then, 2 documents appeared, side by side. "On the left," Arthur said, his voice as calm as a lecturer's, "we have the last will and testament of Thomas Collins, executed in my office 6 years ago, signed by Mr. Collins, myself, and my senior partner." He pointed to the document on the right. "And on the right, we have the last will and testament, revised, the document that was read in my office after Mr. Collins passed, the document that, as you know, named Miss Jenna Miller as the sole heir." Jenna sat up straighter, a proud little smile on her face. Brad looked impatient. "Arthur, we all know this. What's this got to in with taxes?" "Patience, Brad," Arthur said. "Today, our entire discussion is about the critical difference between these 2 documents." He clicked again. The screen zoomed in, showing 2 signatures, side by side. Thomas Collins, the one on the left, was strong, practiced, the T and C bold. The one on the right, the one from the revised will, was shaky, thin, and slightly off-kilter. "At first glance," Arthur said. "The signature on the revised will appears to be that of a man in poor health. However, a preliminary report from a court-appointed forensic handwriting expert suggests something else." He clicked. A block of text appeared on the screen. I read it upside down. "Exhibits characteristics of imitation, not degradation. The tremor is inconsistent with known. Baseline samples from the same time period, a high probability of forgery." The room dropped 10 degrees. Jenna's face went from pale to the color of the white wall behind her. Brad Miller was on his feet. He was turning red. "What the hell is this? Arthur," he boomed. "This is libel. Are you trying to cover your own ass for a mistake? Are you senile? You accepted this will, you filed it. Grandpa wanted that." Jenna's voice was a high-pitched squeak. "He was sick. He told me he wanted me to have it." "That's interesting." "Miss Miller," Arthur said, his voice never rising. "Because your grandfather, he was very, very clear about what he wanted." I stood up. My mother, Brad, Jenna. They all turned to look at me. It was the first time I had ever commanded their full attention. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my laptop bag, took out the small digital voice recorder, and pressed play. The room was filled with a hiss of static, and then his voice, my grandfather's voice, weak, papery, but unmistakable. "Arthur, is that you? I'm worried, Arthur, about the revisions." My mother made a small, choking sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. The voice on the recording continued. "That son-in-law of mine, he's in my house. He's talking about money. He's talking about balancing things. I need to know. Do you have the letter, the protection for Paisley? Did you get the letter I sent?" The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother, Linda, was staring at the television, but she wasn't seeing it. She was seeing the ghost that had just filled the room. "Father," she whispered, was worried he was protecting Paisley." "It seems he was, Linda," Arthur said, his voice soft. He turned back to Brad, who was still standing, his mouth open, the color draining from his face. "As of 9 a.m. this morning," Arthur said, his voice now a gavel, A petition was received by the Maple Ridge Probate Court, a petition to set aside the revised will on the grounds of forgery, fraud, and clear, demonstrable undue influence. That petition includes this call log. It includes the server log from my firm. Tracing the upload of the revised will not to my office, but to the IP address of Miller Real Estate. It includes the preliminary forgery report. And it includes the sworn affidavit of a Miss Sarah Jensen, a former associate tracked down in Florida, who has admitted to mishandling documents in exchange for a personal loan from Mr. Brad Miller. One of Brad's suits was already closing his briefcase. The other one looked like he was going to be sick. And finally, Arthur said, the petition includes this. He reached into his coat and for the first time, pulled out the cream-colored envelope. He didn't open it. He just placed it on the table. Brad stared at it. This is a joke, he stammered. But his bluster was gone. He was a deflating balloon. You can't prove any of this. It's just a bunch of paper. Actually, the quiet Mr. Graves said from the end of the table. They can... Everyone turned. Mr. Graves stood up, all 5'8" of him. He looked at Brad, then at Jenna. My name is Peter Graves. I am a clerk with the probate court. I am here as an official witness, as this meeting was presented as a potential good faith negotiation. I must advise all parties that given the petition, this is now an active investigation, and everything you say is being noted. The air didn't just get thin, it was gone. Brad looked from Mr. Graves to Arthur to me. The trap was sprung. He was cornered, and like all cornered rats, he bit. This is her, he yelled, pointing at me. This is all because of her. She's poisoned all of you. She didn't need the old man's money. She's got millions. She's a vice president. It was imbalance. It wasn't fair. He was panting, his face mottled. So what? So what if we helped a dying man see reason? So what if a few corrections were made? A little signature, a few percentage points. It's just balancing. It's what he should have done. It's not a crime to make things fair. It was a confession, full-throated and arrogant. I didn't even look at him. I looked at Jenna. She was the epicenter of the storm. Her face had crumbled. The heiress mask was gone, replaced by the terrified 5-year-old girl. And she did what she had always done. She blamed someone else. He told me, she shrieked, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. He told me, she was pointing at Brad. You said it was fine. You said it was just adjusting the percentages. She was sobbing, hysterical, a full-blown collapse. You told me Grandpa was too tired to sign. You told me it was my job to help him. You said he'd never know, and Paisley would never know, and it would all be mine. The room was silent, save for her gasping sobs. I had my hand in my pocket, the small digital voice recorder I had placed on the table. The one that looked like a USB stick was still on. Its tiny red light was glowing. My mother, Linda, just sat. She didn't move. She just sat on the coffee machine stool, a ghost in her own daughter's play. She looked at me, her eyes vacant, pleading. Paisley, she whispered, a word I could barely hear. I didn't know. I just looked at her, the cold, hard, empty look of a zero. I gave her nothing. She had given me nothing, and now I was returning the favor. Mr. Graves, the court clerk, stood up and cleared his throat, the sound like an axe splitting wood. This meeting is over, he said, his voice all business. Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, Miss Miller, I advise you to contact your attorneys, immediately, by order of the court. As of this moment, all assets of the Collins estate are hereby frozen, all accounts, all property, all sales, everything. He looked at Brad. That includes Miller Collins Holdings. He looked at Jenna. And that includes the boat. We filed out, my grandmother, her hand on my arm, walked out of that house without looking back. I was the last to leave. I paused on the wraparound porch, the one from Jenna's Instagram story. I looked out at the lake. It was gray and cold, the water choppy. Down at the dock, a man from the bank was already there, a large, fluorescent orange sticker in his hand, walking toward the new $60,000 wakeboarding boat. Jenna was at the window, watching him. Her face was a mask of pure, primal horror. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel avenged. I felt quiet. I walked out to the edge of the lawn, near the water, where my grandfather had taught me to skip stones. He hadn't wanted me to have his money. He had wanted me to have his protection. He had wanted me to have a voice. And standing there, as the first cold drops of rain began to fall, I finally understood. This wasn't about the money at all. It was about giving him his voice back. It was about making sure that, finally, the truth he had written was the only one that would ever be read. The legal battle, when it came, was not a quiet negotiation. It was a full-scale conflagration. The petition to the probate court, thick with evidence, became public record. The local press, starved for scandal, devoured it. The story of the wealthy, unassuming Maple Ridge investor, the forged will, and the two granddaughters, one a local heiress, the other a Denver tech mogul, became front-page news. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months later, 3 months in which the Collins estate remained frozen, a monument to a crime, its white and gray rooms gathering dust. The courtroom was small, old, and packed. The wooden pews were filled with Maple Ridge locals, all there to see the drama unfold. I sat in the front row, not with my mother, but with my grandmother Evelyn. I had flown in my own legal team from Denver, but we were being represented by a sharp, unsmiling man from Chicago whom Arthur Blake had called a shark. Arthur, to his credit, was sitting behind us, his face pale. He was listed as a primary witness. Brad and Jenna sat on the other side of the aisle, each with their own stressed, low-budget lawyer. My mother, Linda, sat behind them, a solitary, broken figure, her loyalties finally, fatally, fractured. Our lawyer was methodical. He didn't begin with emotion. He began with data. He presented the server logs, projecting the IP address 72.11 onto a large screen for the judge. This, Your Honor, is the digital fingerprint of Miller Real Estate, the office of Mr. Brad Miller. It is the origin point of the fraudulent will, which was then emailed to an accomplice at the law firm. He presented the affidavit from Sarah Jensen, the legal associate in Florida, who, in exchange for immunity, had confessed everything. She detailed the personal loan from Brad and the pressure he'd applied, assuring her it was what the family wanted. He presented the forensic handwriting expert's report. It was 30 pages long and concluded, with 99% certainty, that the signature on the revised will was a crude, practiced imitation, digitally scanned and affixed to the document, and did not, in any way, match the known, frail signature of Thomas Collins from that time. Then, he played the audio recording. My grandfather's voice, thin and worried, filled the courtroom. "I'm worried, Arthur, about the revisions I need to know. Do you have the letter, the protection for Paisley?" My mother let out a strangled sob. The entire courtroom heard it, and finally, our lawyer submitted the letter itself. He read it, from "My dear Paisley" to "Don't you ever doubt it," into the official court record. When he finished, the silence in the room was a living, breathing thing. Then, the witnesses. My grandmother Evelyn was first for our side. She was small, but her voice was clear. She told the court about her husband of 55 years, about how he had built his own wealth, about how he had loved his firstborn daughter, but was deeply worried about her new husband, Brad, and how, most of all, he was determined to protect Paisley. "He told me," she said, looking at the judge, "that Paisley had been forced to carve her own path, and he was going to make damn sure she had a foundation. He said he wouldn't let the wolves get to her." Arthur Blake was next. He looked broken. He admitted his negligence. He admitted he was fooled, that he had trusted Brad and Jenna, and that it was the greatest failure of my professional life. His testimony, full of self-incrimination, made the evidence irrefutable. Then, it was their turn. Brad Miller took the stand. He was all bluster, his face red, his expensive suit looking cheap under the fluorescent lights. His lawyer tried to object, but Brad couldn't help himself. "Yes, I knew Sarah Jensen," he spat. "She was a fine associate. I might have loaned her some money, but this is a fantasy. This is a rich, spoiled brat," he pointed at me, who couldn't stand that her grandfather finally saw the light. Our lawyer, the shark, was quiet. "Mr. Miller, are these your emails?" He projected them. Calendar invites. "Meeting with Sarah J. Follow up on TC, Will. Final draft." All sent from his Miller Real Estate account. Brad's face fell. He stammered. "It's about optimization tax, like I said. It says here, final draft," the lawyer said. "One day before you and Miss Miller visited the hospital, what final draft were you discussing with a real estate associate? Mr. Miller?" He had no answer. He just sat there, trapped, but the real show was Jenna. She took the stand in a performance of a lifetime. She was dressed in a conservative black dress, her face pale, her hands shaking. She cried before the first question was asked. She claimed, in a small, weak voice, that she had done nothing wrong. "Grandpa Tom loved me," she wept. "He wanted me to have the lake house. He told me. He was so tired. He was so sick. He asked me to help him, to sign things." It was a catastrophic admission. The courtroom gasped. "He asked you to sign his will for him?" our lawyer asked, his voice gentle, dangerous. "He was too tired," she sobbed. "His hand was shaking. I was just his helper." "Is that why?" the lawyer said, holding up a printed screenshot. "You sent this text message to your friend 2 days before your grandfather died." He showed the screen. It was a text from Jenna. "OMG, it's finally happening. Brad handled the lawyer. Just need to get Grandpa to sign, and Paisley is gone. The entire estate. It's all mine." Jenna looked at the text. She looked at the judge, and the performance shattered. A sound came out of her, a raw, ugly wail of pure, selfish terror. She collapsed, sobbing. "He made me do it, Brad. Brad said it was the only way. He said she didn't deserve it." It was over. The last person to take the stand was my mother, Linda. She was called by the court. She looked like a ghost. Her eyes empty. The judge's question was simple. "Mrs. Miller, you are his daughter. You are their mother. Did you know any of this was happening?" My mother looked at Brad. She looked at Jenna. Then, she looked at me. Her face was a ruin. I, she began, her voice a whisper. I didn't ask. "You didn't ask," the judge said, his voice sharp. She broke. The tears came, hot and pathetic. "I saw them. I knew Brad was fixing things. I told myself it was fine. I told myself Paisley had her own life. She had all that money. She was fine. I just wanted Jenna to have something." It was the most honest and most damning sentence of her life. She had looked away. She had, as her final act of motherhood, been willfully, deliberately blind. The judge's decision was immediate. He didn't even need to recess. His voice was like ice. He concluded that the revised will was, without a shadow of a doubt, a product of a disgusting and clumsy conspiracy. He found that Thomas Collins was the victim of profound undue influence, fraud, and forgery. He declared the revised will null, void, and invalid. He then declared the original will the one from 6 years prior, the one he had received a copy of from Arthur's archive to be the one, true, and final last will and testament of Thomas Collins. The gavel came down. The judgment. The entire Collins estate, the lake house, the stocks, the land, The bank accounts was to be transferred to me. Paisley Hernandez. Effective immediately. Jenna Miller was to retain only what was in the original, conditional trust, a small fund she could not touch unless she graduated from a 4-year college and held a job. Terms she had not met. The judge was not finished. He turned to the other side of the courtroom. Furthermore, he said, this court is referring its findings to the district attorney's office. The evidence of criminal conspiracy, forgery, and elder fraud is, in my opinion, overwhelming. I would expect indictments for Mr. Brad Miller and Miss Jenna Miller to be forthcoming. After the courtroom cleared, after the reporters had been pushed aside, I walked with my grandmother and Arthur back to the lake house. It was now, officially, my house. It was silent. Jenna's ugly white furniture and gray rugs were still there. They looked like a cheap stage set that had been abandoned. The air was stale. Arthur, his face grim, walked to the study, to my grandfather's old roll-top desk. Your grandfather, in his letter, he said, left one final instruction. He pointed to a small, wall-mounted safe, hidden behind a painting of a duck. He said, if Paisley is reading my letter, then give her this combination her father's birthday. My breath caught. I turned the old, clicking dial. The day my father was born. The safe opened with a heavy metallic sigh. Inside, there was no money, no jewels. There was just an old leather-bound ledger, and on top of it, a single, folded note. I opened the note. It was his handwriting, strong and clear. If this got to the right person, use this to do something better than throw lake parties. I sat down in his old, cracked leather chair. It still smelled faintly of him. I opened the ledger. It wasn't just a list of his stocks and assets. That was the first half. The second half was a list of names. Mary, at the diner. Son is smart. Dad left. Needs help. The Johnson kid. Wants to be a mechanic. Good with his hands. The girl who shelves books at the library. The quiet one. Reminds me of Paisley. It was a list of kids in Maple Ridge. Kids he had been watching. Kids he had wanted to help, but never had the chance. I knew, in that instant, what my true inheritance was. I didn't sell the lake house. I had it gutted. I had the white paint stripped, the warm wood restored. I found his old furniture in storage, the comfortable chairs, the chess set, and I brought them home. I established the Thomas and Evelyn Collins Fund, a private scholarship for children in that county, children from broken homes, children who were overlooked, children who, like me, were seen as an afterthought. Brad Miller was indicted on 3 felony counts. He is, I believe, still in a legal battle I no longer pay attention to. Jenna, to pay her own legal fees, was forced to sell her car, her designer bags, and every other asset she had. She works, I've heard, as a hostess at a chain restaurant. My mother, Linda, lives in a small, rented apartment, the one my grandfather had originally bequeathed to her for 5 years. She is alone. I do not call. I have not forgiven them. I have just erased them. I have removed myself from their lives as completely as they tried to remove me from his. One afternoon, late last summer, I was sitting on the porch of the lake house. My grandmother, her face softer and more at peace than I had seen in years, was sitting beside me, knitting, down on the water. There was noise, laughter. A group of teenagers, the first class of the Collins Scholars, were at a week-long skills camp. They were learning to code, to manage money, to change a tire. They were learning to be seen. I used to think that revenge was about taking back every dollar they had stolen. I thought it was about winning, about making them as small as they had made me. But as I sat there, listening to the sound of those kids laughing, the sound of a future he had wanted to build, I understood. The most beautiful revenge is not about destruction. It's about reclaiming your own story. It's about taking the very thing they tried to use against you and turning it into a foundation. My stepsister pretended to be the heir and took everything, until my grandfather's lawyer called me not to give me money, but to give me a voice. He called to give my grandfather his voice back. He called to return his right to decide who truly belonged in his family, and this time, they will never be able to erase me from his story again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect. And please share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.